Hey guys, we're live. Welcome to today's program. Today we're excited to have amazing young people from across the world and across Africa. So we're excited to have all of you here. One of our guests also will be joining us. I think she has a little bit challenge with the internet, and it's quite exciting to host you guys and looking forward to a great conversation. And I would just like us to first introduce ourselves, and I'm going to start with Steven, and then Tabang, and then Moses, and then Awar. Welcome to the program, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't know where to start, but yeah, my name is Steven Mashua, and I'm currently winding up a master's in public policy, and it's a pleasure being here and looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you very much.
Okay, hi, my name is Tabang Mokhatle. I am currently an attorney based in South Africa, specializing or focusing in corporate commercial law. Also very passionate about the continent, and yeah, quite excited to engage with the panel tonight.
Moses.
Hi everyone, my name is Moses Ogutu. I'm an international trade and development specialist. I'm joining the call from Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm really passionate about African trade issues and Africa's role in international affairs. And I'm looking forward to sharing some tips and being in this with you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Awar Nyuka. I'm an international development practitioner. I'm currently based in San Francisco, California. I specialize on partnerships for development, especially engaging different strategic partners to promote the agendas of the SDGs. And I'm happy to join these amazing talents of human beings in this panel tonight, or this morning for people. For Machu and myself, it's this morning. For the rest of you, I think probably it's the nighttime. Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. I think that was a quite good introduction right there. I mean, looking at the topic that we're discussing today, which is quite an interesting topic, talking about, opportunities, African economic opportunities and the way forward for COVID-19. And I just want to get from your own views, how do you feel that COVID-19 has been able to affect the world? Like, what impact do you feel this COVID thing has had so far? And I think we'll start with Steven.
So I think the most basic one is COVID has forced companies to rethink on their business models, and to a broader extent, some are forced to fire their employees or to lay off their staff, and it's turning out to be a bit of a challenge for especially in developing countries which do not have enough resources to cushion their businesses. I see, like in places like Canada, where I am currently, the government is really insisting on bringing in some cushioning program to small businesses, and it has set aside a lot of money just in form of loans, in form of grants, just to help small businesses get back to their feet. But then our developing countries and most of our African countries don't have that advantage. So that aspect of disruption in business models, the interventions by governments and development partners are some of the things that we are likely to see happening in the next probably 1 year or so. But then the success of it depends on how well organized the government is or was before COVID. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, I think Taban, you can be able to probably say something.
Sure.
Do you feel that this COVID has had an impact in in our day-to-day life? How is it in South Africa? How are you guys coping up with it? What are some of the plans that the government is putting in place, and especially young people who are struggling, with their day-to-day jobs?
Yeah, so I think, as Stephen already touched on, I think in developing countries, I mean, it's just highlighting the extent of inequality, the extent of access issues for many people, because the reality is, a lot of people can't actually afford a lockdown that's extended. I mean, in South Africa, this has been the conversation, I would imagine, I think, since the beginning of the lockdown, is to say, appreciated that government has implemented certain measures to curb the spread of the pandemic or the disease. But the challenges are very real on the economic level. On a socio-economic level, it's just highlighting how unequal a society we are, and that, whilst some of these measures really benefit the middle to the upper class, the realities are that there are several people who simply cannot access the means to continue a livelihood under the circumstances. And I'm hoping that as we engage in the conversation this evening, just to sort of touch on just, some of the historical inequalities, the infrastructural inequalities Africa has inherited. But, seeing as this conversation tonight is about opportunities and the future going forward, I think there's so much that as young people, as entrepreneurial people, some of us can really identify gaps to really sort of, really meet the need, if I could call it that. So I mean, of course, we could speak to no end about the issues. There are several. But I think tonight should really be a session where we sort of think through how do we then create a future beyond COVID-19 that makes sense for the Africa that we all aspire to live in.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, obviously, we just kind of like, starting the conversation and trying to see. I mean, you all in different parts. I mean, Caro she's from Kenya, but she's currently based in the US. Caro, could you probably just tell us a little bit about, how is the situation there, and how is the government coping up with? Because I know US has had like a very huge numbers. I think they're still leading, in terms of COVID-19 numbers. So before we start, the opportunities and all that, probably just maybe you can take us through what you think. I mean, how the situation is there.
I think if I just provide like a brief background, I'm in California, the state of California, San Francisco to be precise. And I remember we were the first state to offer shelter in place. Started way down in March. And I think this also took place because like most organizations and employers realized that, you know what, we needed to take like a step forward if you're going to help the government to support these initiatives. I started working from home sometime, I think 12 March this year and until now. And so what that did was that when the shelter in place was put in place, numbers in California kind of just stagnated or went down the same way. And we were really looking forward to reopening the month of June. And then, of course, what happened with riots and protesting. And then they said we were to open on the 1st of July. Unfortunately, that has been pushed forward because of the increasing numbers of COVID infections in the region. And I think it's a good thing. It's for the benefit of the people. But what I see around now is that it's a bit relaxed. I think it's reached a point whereby I think it's happening across the continent or across the world where people feel like, I've heard people say things like, if I perish, I perish. You understand? I'm tired of being in the same situation for some time. So I'm going to go out there. But then again, I go out there myself as well. But I wear my mask. The reason why I wear my mask is that I don't know what I have. I haven't been tested, though free testing is now going on. But I'm trying to protect the people that might have access to me, my households and everybody else. Because it will be a shame that somebody goes down because of my recklessness. And I think that's what we need to. We need to keep on reminding people. And I think there's something, maybe, I don't know if he's a doctor here, but I feel like somehow like mentality management, and I think the Kenyan government is doing that. We are going to give you this thing in small dosage, Oh, we're opening in the next 2 weeks. And then, because, if you tell a human being you're opening in 4 months, they're going to go crazy. But if you give them in smaller dosages, the same thing California has done. Oh, we're opening next week. And then, no, we can't open. And then you see the reason behind it. So I can't speak for other states, but I think there's like a website where everybody can go on to and see the status. But I think until further notice, this thing is here to stay with us. It's upon each and every individual to do their best to ensure that we move forward post-COVID, because I think there's going to be post-COVID. And it's not just going to end like that. It's going to take time. It's going to take initiatives from the citizens themselves, from the government themselves, and from any other stakeholders involved. So I think that's what's happening in San Francisco as a whole.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Stephen, you are in policy in different aspects, and also have a huge experience and a huge expertise in terms of urban planning. And we see, we see most of our cities have been affected globally in terms of COVID-19. You've seen how cities are clean. You've seen how things have been. Could you just give us a little bit about how do future cities look like in terms of, economic development, in terms of even preparedness for the next pandemic? Because you don't know that if probably maybe 10 years later, we'll still have a serious pandemic like this. How should cities be prepared? And do you really feel that African cities are actually prepared enough for this kind of change of lifestyle?
Thanks, Calvin, for that question. So from where we are coming from, African cities are still in the developing state, and if you think about it, it's about the hygiene, it's about the health and environment aspects, which in a way, people are living in crowded spaces. We have places like Nairobi, which has quite a number of informal settlements, and the same reflects in Cape Town. If you go to Lagos, you'd find that. If you go to Cairo, you'd see the same informal settings. So about preparedness for the future pandemics, I think the first and most important thing would be, and I think Tabang mentioned it earlier, is addressing the infrastructural inequalities. How and it goes deeper to check into spatial inequalities, how different geographical locations within a city are treated differently, not only by the government of the day, but even by the private sector and development stakeholders. We've had stories about cities of contrast, where the most vulnerable individuals are living in the same city with the most rich people you can ever get. So those clear-cut differences are things that we might want to address, because no one is safe. Right now, your survival depends on the responsibility of the other person. And if the other person doesn't have a choice, if the other person doesn't have access to water, doesn't have access to resources or things that he can use to sanitize, then probably you, with all your richness, you're not safe. Because if let's take a hypothetical scenario. Imagine 90% of Kibera is affected by COVID, and think about the people living just in the neighborhood around maybe Ngong Road, the affluent areas of Karen. Karen or any other surrounding affluent area depends on the workforce that comes from Kibera, right? Or to some extent, there's some level of interaction that takes place. So if the rich are to really be safe, then they have to address the issues of the poor. And those are the things that we need to really look at deeply. That's from an inequality perspective. Now, economically, I'm seeing a situation whereby most our real estate markets most office blocks or most houses are going to really suffer. People who own rental houses, they're going to suffer in a way, noting that people are no longer able to pay the amount they would have been able to pay like 3 months before COVID. So it's a case of are we at what point is the real estate players going to, to what extent are they going to be flexible with the people, and will it be within an acceptable margin? Because if you think about it, these are people who probably set up some of these developments on loans. Some people are on mortgage, and they need to recover their money. So there needs to be a lot of flexibility with financial institutions, with real estate developers, and even businesses. To some extent, they have to end up selling their products at a lower price than they would have sold if the situations were normal. So what I'm seeing from an economic point of view is a lot of disruption, and the aspect of empathy will have to come in, however capitalistic we want or we would like to be. And beyond that, we need to look at accelerating the space for e-commerce within the African cities. And by this, I'm thinking through the us going with speed to set up the necessary digital infrastructure to enable e-commerce to take place. Because right now we still depend majorly on China, we depend on America, and it doesn't mean like the continent doesn't have, the continent has all the resources in terms of human resource, human capacity to make e-commerce work, but we are still relying on external platforms. And I think Moses will be able to bring in a very interesting perspective about trade. I can't wait to hear what he has to say around that. But inter-African trade, and of course it's mostly driven by African cities, is something that we really need to look into deeply and invest with the seriousness it deserves. That's what I have around those two, but then more will come in through the discussion.
Yeah, let's jump quick to Moses. We're talking about we're talking about the future, the opportunities right now, the economic opportunities right now, and the way forward. And Africa has a huge bulge of young population, and that's where the focus is. So Moses, what do you think about Africa free trade area, continental area, which I know it's such a key discussion going on right now? How can young people benefit from it? What do you think? Just a few. We have a few countries, although quite a lot of countries have ratified. What do you think would be the best, for this, especially for the opportunities that comes along with the Africa free trade area? And looking at, you're staying in South Africa right now, but looking at South Africa, looking at Kenya, what do you think?
So thanks so much, Calvin. And I think it's good to pick in from Stephen, because Stephen was just finalizing about the e-commerce side of things, and I think that's where trade comes in. First of all, I think it's not to say that it is good that Corona, when the discussion about the CFTA was happening or not, but I think it came at a critical time. On the positive side, we can say that it came at a critical time when we were still finalizing the aspects of the CFTA. All of us understand that the CFTA, as it is, it's still an infant, it's still young, because we have this massive document that has been signed because what has been completed is actually the overall framework. The nitty-gritties that make trade happen are yet to be finalized, actually. So, and that's why I joke that we often like to say with some of the people that young people that I meet in these conversations is that yes, we can be singing of how much the CFTA of how much we have this agreement for African trade, right? Yet you know that it doesn't mean that you can easily walk. I mean, like if you are in Kenya, it doesn't mean that you can easily land in Malawi with your goods and you will enter, because they've been singing of how we've moved into free trade, right? But trust me, you'll get on your plane with your goods and land in Malawi, and then you'll be surprised that actually there's no trade happening. Like there's just a lot that is yet to be done. You get it?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I think that COVID happening at this critical time when we've signed the overall framework for the CFTA and the nitty-gritties that make the business happen are yet to be finalized, is an opportunity for us to reflect and actually now see, okay, we actually need to fast track the elements, the small elements, for example, like how we eliminate non-tariff barriers, like how we actually now practically make the real trade happen. You see, all in all, yeah, finalizing the overall framework is good. But now, just moving into with the good examples is that what we've seen from some of the lessons from the trade side of things that we've seen from the impacts of COVID is that the over-reliance of global supply chains, for example, where you realize that because everybody was trading with China, and China was the powerhouse manufacturing everything that nearly every other country in the world needed, right? And then when the country itself faced the situation, first of all, they take care of their own, right? And then now when trouble hits Europe and everywhere else, so everybody's rushing China, what do you have? What can you make for us, right? And then they can deliver. But then, so that's the global supply chain where we realize, okay, we've been relying on somebody far away to actually make for us what we need. And then in that moment, we reflect and say, but wait, we might not be able to make the other things, but we can make the masks, or we can make they call this, what's the name for the ones they use in the hospitals? Anyway, some of the critical equipment that are needed. But I think the mask is a good example to use because we realized that some of the things that we needed, if we were trading, if let's say in the East African community, for example, or the East Africa region, if there was a regional supply base of some of the things we need, let's say if already the medical equipments were being produced in Tanzania or in Kenya or in Uganda, whichever the country, and then it's easier because we know that, when you have a neighbor who has what you need, it's quickly easier to deal with them and get your problem sorted than waiting for somebody who's far away. But the important lesson, as we are seeing, is that we've actually now discovered that we can rely on our own regions, first of all, to assist us, but also we've also seen the capacity of our producers to produce some of these things. I think it's not a mistake to say that apart from the medical equipment that we needed, for the medical equipment that we needed to import from outside, most of the basic things that we needed to handle our lockdowns, etc. And what I talk about here, we can really talk about food, for example. We've fed ourselves. During lockdown, I don't think that there was much of a food import coming in. We've seen our rural areas feeding our urban areas, right? Yet traditionally, it's always been, it's normally a symbiotic process where the urban areas, there's a way in which they assist the rural areas, maybe with finance, and the rural farmers produce, do the farming and get the foods into towns, etc. But overall, I think this is where we've seen what really can happen if we were to increase our capacities in terms of becoming self-sufficient. Because dependency has its own impacts, and I think this was the perfect example to see that. Now how can the CFTA help us improve the situation? We need to fast We need to fast track it. We need to finalize on the things that make trade work. And then we use that to now expand and increase the intra-African trade. If we can expand the example of the East African community that I've talked about, for example, if there's hunger in Cameroon or in Malawi, and there's surplus food being produced in Kenya, I mean, like we've always talked about this. For example, the tomatoes rotting in some parts of Kenya, while in another region in Kenya itself, they are lacking tomatoes, right? Or maybe another African country is lacking tomatoes. Yet, the only thing preventing the people in central Kenya from supplying tomatoes to the region, to Kampala, where maybe there might be a lack of tomatoes, just as an example, is some paper that actually doesn't have any good. Maybe it's just paperwork that needs to be eliminated to make trade happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So with the impact of COVID, where we've seen countries struggle from the over-reliance from relying on somebody else to supply what they need, is actually a reflection on now. It tells us that we need to make things work. And one of the ways of making things work as we move forward in this process is to eliminate some of these barriers, like really get the CFTA running. If I can put the example of Stephen was talking about e-commerce, then as trade happens, then we ask ourselves, how can the customer in Kisumu or in Kampala connect with the supplier in Nairobi or in central Kenya or in Cape Town, from wherever they are, and supply what is lacking there? And I think in between there's lots of opportunities, and it's safe to say that even during this crisis, I think most of the masks were made by young people, right? And even institutions that we thought can't produce anything, they rose up to the occasion and supplied what we needed. And to summarize, I think we've seen that we can be independent, we can feed ourselves, and we can produce these things. From now going forward, is for us to actualize these. Let us not slow down the process. We need to move forward. So that's basically what I can mention now. The rest in the discussion, of course.
Thank you very much. Before I come to a war, I just want to ask. I want to go to Taban. One of the things that we've experienced, so far is a lot of social injustices. When you look at wealth disparity, you've seen that the people who are below, I call them, poverty line. I mean, they've been really struggling. Nobody, there's no food. Most of governments are not providing food. I mean, they are really, really struggling, and you see the struggle still continues. My question is, how can, going forward, how can we have a very just and inclusive government that actually probably take care of everyone? Because I know that African governments were not really prepared for this particular pandemic, and going forward, how can that be implemented?
It's a good question, Calvin, but I think perhaps the answer won't be a very popular one. I think, as has been the nature of socioeconomic inequalities in Africa, this has largely been left to government to address through policy. And I mean, I think about South Africa, for example, with a constitution that is meant to support the rights of virtually every citizen on paper, but in implementation, it's been lacking. And the reality is the system is not really at this point at the type of capacity that it could be sort of a social welfare state, if I could call it that. In as much there's been so many measures, and I don't think this is unique to South Africa. I think that this is something we're seeing across the continent. Governments are generally just struggling to carry the social economic burden that comes with dealing with a pandemic like this one. And I think for me, the government question, it's neither sort of here or there. I think government has its own capacity. I think for various government is not able to leverage the fullness of that capacity, be it structural issues, be it infrastructural issues, be it corruption, and other things. I mean, you will note and have noted perhaps that in South Africa, all these beautiful measures put in place, one of which was to provide food parcels at one point to communities that are really impoverished, that don't have access to, they're not on, for people who are not on benefits or grants by the state, employed. There was the food parcel sort of arrangement made, and there you saw government officials actually looting even the food parcels. So I think for us to look to government still in this day and age, we're really setting ourselves up for failure, and not because of an extreme lack of confidence. I think there is a substantial lack of confidence in governments for various reasons. I think for me as a young person, and just looking at some of the ways that individuals, organizations, SMEs have stepped up to the plate to say, look, this is where we see ourselves partnering with the local communities as the private sector. This is where we see ourselves stepping in and providing solutions. I'm going to have to say that this is going to be a multi-party initiative. This is certainly not going to be something that we're going to look to government. And I think it will be a lesson for many African societies to say, we've dealt with now a global pandemic. We've seen how our governments have or have not been prepared to respond. And can we really leave our livelihoods, our sources of income, our health just to the government? It has to be something we take on personally. I just think about there's a company in Cape Town. You might have read about them, Cape Bio. I think her name is Dineo, and her partner, I think his name is Daniel and Dima. If I'm not mistaken, the two of them, have stepped up, and I think from about 2 months ago, tried to develop the technology for a far more cost-efficient testing kit for COVID-19, something that would just be beneficial to even the most sort of outlying community members, given the nature of it. Government has, I think, at some point mentioned that they are working on something, but again, that hasn't come too far. And I think it's initiatives like those that are really going to mark, they're going to really pioneer the paths for the future. So I think the issue of governments is one thing, but I think we have to look at social justice as something that's not just the responsibility of a government. Things like equity, things like access, rights. These are things that, yes, should be stewarded and the government should be custodians of. But things, me personally, even as the ordinary citizen, the business owner, should also say, look, what role do I play? How do I hold my government accountable? And where do I see that where there's a lack of a response from government, what can I do, to serve as well?
Okay. Yeah, which I think is very good. I mean, I like the way you brought the aspect, and Caroline, as she's worked a lot in development organizations. She's worked with many NGOs, some of the top NGOs across the continent. And Awar, what do you think about the future in terms of non-profit organizations? Like right now, there's a lot of there's literally lack of funding. How can NGOs be innovative enough, and going forward post this COVID, what are some of the opportunities that they can be able to explore? Because I think that would really help, especially NGOs in Africa.
I had muted myself. Calvin, I always look at NGOs. I went to this meeting, and it was a very debated meeting. And one of, I think she's coming out with my favorite person, said that when you look at NGOs, the governments have a budget. The profits have their own businesses, and they have the bottom line. Then what do NGOs have? NGOs have something like breadcrumbs that are thrown to you to do the work that either the government failed to do, and the businesses are not willing to do it because it's not their bottom line. It's not part of their work. So NGOs are left to do that. And then she also said that NGOs is like yourself and your social capital. If you understand what I mean by social capital. You're responsible for yourself, but if you're sick and you're unable to pay your medical bills, you run to social capital to help you. So ideally, NGOs were not meant to stay this long. NGOs were created after the World War II, and they were to come in, solve something, and disappear. But here they are with us. And they're here to stay for some time, but that is changing up. So if you look at that perspective, and with the COVID-19, I think most multilateral organizations, even institutions, are going to first try and figure out how to help their own people before they even go to the NGOs. What that means is that the ODA is likely to drop. That's what they're saying. It's likely. I'm not saying it's going to drop. It's likely to drop. And what that means is you're going to have a situation by NGOs can no longer do the jobs that they've been doing for some time. And so for me, I always think that NGOs will have to rethink their business model to diversify the sources of income and build and grow new alliances. And this is going to be between the tripartite relationship between the government, the private sector, and the civil society organizations. That is the way they're going to go forward. And I'm going to say something that it's not like people's opinion, but I always believe also in local philanthropy. I always say that these are our problems, this is our money, and this is our solutions. Look at what COVID-19 has done to us. We are able to produce our own mask to solve us. Are you waiting to be pushed to the wall to do that? And the same case with NGOs. The good thing with NGOs is that they work in the communities, and the communities are the best response people when it comes to solving a solution. But what NGOs have been doing for so long is being an enabler. No, we don't need to do that. We need to put these people at the forefront and tell them, look, these are your problems. This is the money, and you need to give us a solution to do this. And if you involve the people themselves, they'll be able to give you a solution. That is local philanthropy. And this goes on to individuals. I don't know if the government can, like I'm speaking about Kenya. Whereby individual giving is going to go down. I've worked previously in a project whereby we were doing something called local philanthropy, and Kenyans were able to give to those causes that they believed are beneficial to their own people. What is stopping us from doing that right now? What is the business of a business entity doing something that a foundation or a nonprofit can do better? That is not their bottom line at all. That's where the tripartite relationship comes in. Bring in these resources, give them to a nonprofit, and help them do their work. That is the future of NGOs. Number 3, I think just like a fund, I think NGOs need some form of liquidity fund. Like with this pandemic, what happened is there was so much to be done, but there's little money. Remember, NGOs depend on external funding, which means they have to do all these proposals. As much as the donor community is rushing up to make these things as fast as possible, shorten up the process of giving out loans and grants, it's still a process. But if you had a fund where you can apply and say, we need this money to do this ABCD, and then we'll be able to repay back. That brings us to the next step of a social enterprise model within a civil society organization, so within an NGO. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If you create your own social enterprise for the same issues you're trying to solve, create a business model that can give you money. It is not easy. Look at bigger organizations like in the UK who've created a social enterprise arm of it. And they get some money. It's not a lot, but that money can come in and solve a situation right there and then. And so it's a big, it's a mental shift for NGOs. I know for a long time we've been used to writing a lot of proposals and getting money in there and, and here and there. But that is not going to happen. We're just going to have to change that model, bring in the business people to our own issues, sit at a table and say, look, we are trying to solve things that I'm not saying the government has failed to do, but the responsibility of the government or the business, as a result of your business activities, these are some of the things that are happening and we need to solve these issues. How do you come in? I mean, remember the first week of when this pandemic hit up really hard, like in the United States, we've seen people coming in with structural adjustment programs. We've seen organizations giving out money to the philanthropy work, telling them, look, we will give you this money to help people in this kind of area. And that's the same thing with Kenya. I might be wrong or not. I haven't been following that a lot, but that is the future of NGOs. It's going to be rethinking their business models, bringing in social enterprises into their work, looking for local philanthropy, and acknowledging that, what, we need to find local solutions for our own local problems. International markets is not working anymore. Maybe our local people are the solutions that we need.
Okay. I don't know if Gorata can be able to hear us. If you can be able to hear us, please unmute your mic and can you introduce yourself. And I don't know if Gorata can be able to hear us. Gorata, can you be able to hear us? No, I think we'll come back to her later. But I mean, back to Stephen, and I think this is a question for everyone. You know, this pandemic has shown us that technology is very key in all sectors, and it doesn't matter whatever sector you're from. You know, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're in illegal legal department. It doesn't matter if you're in trade. It doesn't matter if you're in you know, development, you know, NGOs and all that. I mean, we've seen technology to be like quite a key thing, you know, and e-commerce, other platforms and all that. Stephen, how do you think Africa can advance its technology in preparedness for future pandemics, and also even just going forward, and what are some of the opportunities that young people can actually explore in technology?
Thank you, Calvin. The most critical bit is recognizing that we actually don't need to go out of the continent to get some of these technologies working. Mm-hmm. And this has been proven by very low investments around young people. I mean, young people who came up with products with very low investment. Sometimes people were working from their bedrooms and were able to come up with ventilators. Others were just mobilizing resources from their friends and family, which June referred to as social capital. Now, looking at those sort of models, I'm thinking about how our little efforts could help us get these technologies that we actually need within the continent. So we need to get out of that bubble where we think that technology is expensive and start looking at the very small investments, you know, putting our young people in incubation labs and giving them the enabling resources in terms of, you know, just you know, paying their sign-up fee or their rent within an incubation lab, and probably giving them the money that they need to test their products. So that's the only way that Africa is going to, you know, step ahead in technology. Now, on a bigger scale, for those innovations or those things, those inventions that have come out of this particular period, our government and development partners need to find a way of remodeling their financing. There's always a bias towards high-end companies. If maybe a big company is able to come up with an innovation, you'll find the development partners and governments trying to incline to that kind of a big innovation, as opposed to looking at what this young person is trying to do and looking at the bigger picture of the potential that that this person is likely to bring. You know, the replica effect, the spiral effect. Remember, if Calvin is able to come up with an innovation, he's likely to influence Moses, he's likely to influence Tabang, because there's a sort of interaction within the younger generation. And you know, that motivation or that inspiration that comes from like, oh yeah, Calvin has done it. Oh wow, I could actually do this for South Africa. I could actually do this for Botswana, as such. So what I'm trying to say is we need to see more investments on done, or we need to see more investments on young people who are trying to come up with things, and channel more finances towards startups, remodel financing towards startups. You know, the low level or low scale sort of innovation, and find a way of getting them to the mainstream.
Sorry, I think we lost Steve a little bit, but I'm sure he should be able to. He'll be back I mean, Tabang, looking at, I mean, let's look a little bit about, you know, legal system, and I mean the judicial system and technology, and I know one of the things, I don't know if it's happening in Southern Africa, but we actually had to, I think that court here has literally not been working. It's when they're trying to get back, and they tried the, you know, the online, and it's not been working very well. What do you think about that?
Sorry, I muted myself.
Yeah, sorry, I think I lost connection.
Oh, is that Calvin?
No, that's Steven. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I lost my connection. But do you want me to continue?
Yes. Please continue.
Okay. So I was talking about investment in research institutions. You know, our universities need to shift from being just places where people come in and live. They need to be places where people come in and live with something. Our engineering institutions, our medical institutions, they need to be spaces where young people are allowed to explore, and that will only happen if our governments are able to put in the necessary financial resources into research. We find professors really struggling a lot within the African continent with research because they don't have the necessary financial resources. We underfund our universities. We underfund our institutions of which are supposed to help us get to the next level. So that aspect of remodeling financing and channeling it to the right places would be a way to help us get to the next level in terms of technology. And lastly, to the African people, we need to find ourselves appreciating more of what is coming out from the continent. You know, I still feel like we have an attitude of like the other continents are better than us. We have an attitude of, you know, if something is not coming from America or Europe or Asia,
if it's not coming from the Silicon Valley,
yeah, it's probably not high quality. Whereas we have developers in our backyards who are doing even a higher quality job, only that we don't validate that as a people. So and I would reach out to some of the words that have been used by Malema, like we have self-hate. You know, we need to get out of that. We need to get out of that space where we don't appreciate, you know, our own inventions or our own products. So we have to love the continent more. We have to buy more from the continent. We have to see how we can strengthen what each other state is trying to come up with, and that way, I think we'll be able to move at a higher speed and do more for the continent.
Okay, Tabang, kindly go ahead.
Sure. So just to answer the question, Calvin, and I think it related just to, you know, just generally the importance of developing technology on the continent, but also how it's impacted the legal sector. Yeah, so I had the privilege earlier on in the year in participating in a legal workshop with a couple of young people that focused on the fourth industrial revolution and the impact that will have on the legal field going forward. And it's interesting to have heard from an expert. She's well-versed within the space, and she currently deals with risk analysis, but she's very technologically inclined as well. And she was just advising that currently we have a number of advancements that are already creeping into the legal services space. You know, just in terms of, you've got now technology-assisted legal review processes. You've got digitization of signatures, digitization of document processing. You even now have virtual courtrooms. And I think all that COVID-19 has managed to do is to sort of fast-track the importance of us getting technologically up to date. So I think really this was inevitable, COVID-19 or not. The question just remains how quick. And I think certainly for for Africa, this is I think, in as much as it may seem daunting for most of the continent, I think it's an exciting time. As Stephen mentioned, I think one of the biggest things, one of the biggest resources, one of the biggest commodities we have is human capital on this continent, and I do enough to invest in that. There are certainly young people who are already playing around with things like cryptocurrencies, to blockchain. Things that are going to definitely revolutionize certain industries, within the continent, and it's just a matter of time. I think it's Fred Swaneker who started the African Leadership Group, the educational group, who was actually saying that he doesn't see any reason we shouldn't be developing our own MITs, our own Silicon Valleys. It's just inevitable. I think it's just, as Stephen has mentioned, a matter of how much are we investing towards that. Some of our behavioral and attitudes rather towards investing in an African product, being proud of and industrializing in African, based products. And for me, I think that's going to be the game changer. It's not that we don't have the capacity to develop such things. I think it's simply how prepared are we to put our money where our mouths are? So yeah, certainly in the legal space, it's already happening. Virtual courtrooms have been taking place throughout the COVID-19 process. You've got mediations and court sessions, some of which are already happening in camera, or in basically courtrooms where there are screens, and judges and magistrates are talking to legal counsel via that. It is happening. So I think COVID has just again accelerated and highlighted the need to really move on with that process and really just be brave, blaze the trail without being afraid and having a complex that we aren't good enough or that we aren't able to produce world-class type technology.
Thank you very much. You work with an organization that is more technology driven, and you've talked about the need for the nonprofit organization, the development organizations to be innovative and look at kind of social impact driven. What role do you think technology is going to play in that particular role?
Well, GDC, I need to echo what Farai, allow me to call you Farai, and Stephen has said so far in terms of, we need to say that this is Africans and made for Africans, and we appreciate Africa. But then again, I always say that I think Africa is running as a pace being, described by somebody else. For me, sometimes when I look at technological advancements, and I'm like, how can we ensure that these technologies allow us to first do the basic needs, education, health, food, You cannot be talking there's a quote my father used to say, that you cannot be talking to somebody about internet when they're hungry. Internet is good for some sectors, but then food is also good in some sectors. And I think we need to sit down as Africa one last time, and say, you know what, we need to decide our own pace. We are running at a fast pace, being challenged by other already developed countries. We are, no offense, but Africa is a developing country. Most of it, not all of them now. I know some are moving on to the next ladder, South Africa and all that. But Kenya is still considered like a developing country. And sometimes I feel that we are moving too fast, faster than we should be moving, and we're leaving things behind, trying to catch up with people who've been in this industry for 100 years. We will get there, no doubt. We just need to take the steps which are right for our own people at first. And I think one of the things that this pandemic, COVID-19, has exposed is some of the basic needs that we don't have. Look at the Kenyan health sector. You listen to it, and people say we have this number of ICU beds. Remember, even for those people who are used to going outside the country for health, cannot leave anymore unless you have some sort of arrangements. You need to sort these things fast. And this is where technology comes, but that's a debate for another day. I work in a crowdfunding platform for nonprofits. And what we do is that we use a lot of technology to ensure that even people far out of reach can get access to some small loans to start their own businesses. And I think that's where technology is going to change. Right now, the World Bank says that we have 1.7 billion people who are an unbanked population, and the majority of them are women. So how can women, because they say that if you empower a woman, you empower like a whole society. So how can the technologies in Africa ensure that the woman in some village in Nyakach, where I come from, who wants to start a small business can have access to that loan? Yes, we have very, very, advanced technologies. I live in the Silicon Valley, so we have very advanced technologies that does that for financial inclusion. But I also wanted to appreciate, I don't know if you know of Thunder Fund. I don't know if anybody's
Thunder Fund.
Thunder Fund. Thunder Fund is African, I'm gonna say it's African, it's born from Africa. Why are we not selling Thunder Fund to ensure that our small businesses can actually also fund their loans through Thunder Fund? It's an African made. It's a very nice platform. People understand what Africans need and the areas that we need. So moving forward, I think technology and innovation is going to be very key for financial inclusion services, be it in Africa, where it is needed, or whether it's in Asia, or whether it is in Europe. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's really, really important. And obviously, Kopano just said that, I agree with Taban too, that the tech has been on the continent. We need to push a little more and also even work at our own pace, which Award also said as well. I think that's really good. I don't know if Moses can be able to hear us. Moses, can you unmute your mic so that I hope you're still there. Yeah. So Moses, I mean, looking at the trade aspect as well. We've talked about some of the challenges that we still have trading across Africa, and I've had a privilege to travel in quite a lot of African countries, and I know what you said about trading. We have language barrier, we have a lot of barriers, we have even people wanting to embrace some technology. Like, if you look, for example, in East Africa, we don't have M-Pesa everywhere. While we know that M-Pesa does very well in Kenya, but we don't have M-Pesa in Uganda. We're struggling with M-Pesa in Rwanda. Why do you think that, especially in technology, why do you think people don't like trading with technology? Is that fear? And how can countries overcome that particular fear?
So, sorry guys, my video has to be off. There's some little hiccups on this side. I think there's several points have been mentioned that I wanted to comment on, but I might comment on some and maybe just focus on the question you've asked. First of all, I think the language barrier could be an issue, but it's a very minor thing as far as trading is concerned. If language was really an issue, then the Ugandans might have been having trouble trading with the Kenyans, and the Tanzanians might be having trouble trading with their neighbors, the Mozambicans and the Zambians. This is not to ignore that, of course, in these countries, there are Swahili speakers as well. I think technology, as we say, can help. And technology has actually been really useful in improving trading within the East African community, for example, especially in the one-stop border shops where when importers and exporters are able to have one place where they can check all their documents, etc. It helps reduce, for example, the documentation needed. But I think a lot can be done into doing it. Maybe it could be the fear, or there's a term for it. It could be the fear, but I don't think it's a fear. I think it just what is needed is to do more capacity building, for instance, in really encouraging the uptake and also focusing on technology that people are actually already used to and they are more comfortable using. If they are happy to do their payments using M-Pesa in East Africa, for instance, then that becomes the focus of making the payment method. And the fact that M-Pesa, for instance, has worked in East Africa, it doesn't mean that it can work in West Africa or Southern Africa. And having lived in both regions, I can tell you that I might be biased, but I know there are some of the reasons that made M-Pesa to kind of fail in South Africa, for example. And this could be from issues of security and the way that the societies are organized, you see. Because even down here, they might not be using M-Pesa, but there are other technology that works as far as these regions are concerned. So I think making those to be the main, focusing on the technology that people are already used to and they are happy or comfortable using, and maybe thinking deeper on them. How then can we make this the mode of payment where technology is not already, or instead of it helps us avoid this element of duplication and thinking that something that happened here could work over there. So if you allow me, the other thing that I wanted, a point was raised here. Stephen mentioned an important point that our institutions need to be somewhere where you enter and come out with something, right? Yeah. Now here's the thing. I think in the end, we also kind of, when it comes to also following technology, our institutions being centers of tech, there are also some kind of misplaced priorities. I can give an example. A University of Nairobi, for example, it's in East Africa, right? Yeah. It's in the tropics. It's a malaria zone. It's the tropics is a malaria zone, right? So a university like a University of Nairobi has more advantage in specializing and becoming the center of the research for tropical diseases like malaria and all the others, right? But instead of focusing and channeling more energy and even training our biologists and scientists to focus and become the center of this kind of crisis, I'm happy to say we waste time focusing on nuclear energy. We waste time opening a nuclear center. Not that we don't need a nuclear, but we don't need it now. It's not our priority. Even in the next 50 years, it's still not our priority. Our priority is, I think it's the focus on really what do we need now and what are some of our advantages. And that is a very good point to start with as a point of reflection. You see that? And because we want everybody else to travel to East Africa, to the University of Nairobi, to study malaria there, because this is where it happens. This is where the victims are. This is where the research is, and this is where this has to be in, right? So that's one element. And if I can also reiterate and comment on some of the things as pertaining to supporting entrepreneurs, I think our institutions are also, and that's where Fred Swanika and his group comes in. Our institutions are also focused on providing the intermediaries, the mid workers. And if you've read Fanon, and I think if you've read Fanon, The Pitfalls of National Consciousness, and this is a text that was written back in the 60s or 80s, but you realize that we are still not doing enough to produce business magnates and industrialists. Because if we want to be, in the next 25 years to 50 years, if we want to be centers of tech and centers of excellence, then we need to be building foundation now where we say, okay, if company X is focusing on biotech, how can we ensure in the next 20 years, company X is actually among the 100 leading biotech companies in the world? But we make sure that this company X, we've groomed it from the ground in Nairobi or in Africa. Whatever the place is, right? And this is where I think ALU, for instance, and Steve's vision, when he talks of creating these young entrepreneurs and these young leaders, I think the idea of focusing on helping these guys found companies, that's part of the vision. But somewhere else where, if we are not careful, these visions might be stolen from us, is the over-reliance on finance from Silicon Valley. And I think most of us have mentioned this, is the over-reliance on finance from Silicon Tech Valleys. So those venture capitalists will come and identify several companies, channel all the money to them. After they have used them or they have made some money out of them or made them the way they wanted to be,
they kill them.
Then they leave them. Yeah, they kill them. or they might not kill them. They might help them grow, but then they'll be acquired by those other companies with the outside companies, and then in the end they end up serving their agenda in terms of revenue being channeled back to where the money came from. The expertise being used is coming from the West, and the management, the control, and everything. You see. So it's also looking in then, as we are building the business magnates, as we are developing these young entrepreneurs, what else then are we doing to ensure that, like I was mentioning, what else are we doing to ensure that if they need the funding comes from our own institutions. If it is philanthropy, and I think that's where there could be some difference between the philanthropy and the philanthropy economy and the NGO economy. The NGO economy might really fully dependent on donor, but then the philanthropy economy is maybe someone even from within, like Tony Limuli, for example, deciding that, okay, I've done my banking business, I've made my money, but I'm going to channel part of my money into developing other young people out there. So we also have these regional or local philanthropies. If our young people, if our companies need help, we are there for them. I'd be happy if in the next 5 years or 10 years, when we do the Black Lives Matter movement or any kind of protest, we do not show ourselves as people who historically, as people who are still looking for pity as people who are still looking for pity because we've been victims of history. Yes, we've been. But then the question is, what have we done to continue taking up those spaces? I think I like the way South Africans call them, because we want to be players in those spaces. You get it? Yeah. And the one way of competing, for example, with the Silicon Valley tech startups is that can we groom some of our companies to be homegrown, and in the next 20 or 50 years, we know we have 10 companies, business magnates in crucial sectors that are African grown and African developed, and they belong to us, and let's have our agendas.
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you very much for that. And I think that's drive us to our second last question. That I'm just going to go to Stephen, and I think Stephen can take us off in that aspect. Stephen, what do you think about the future of jobs? Moses has touched on some really key areas. Moses has touched in terms of specialization. Moses has touched in terms of developing our own resources and investing in our own companies and not having to depend on donor funding, not having to depend on Silicon Valley investors and all that, and creating that our ecosystem. What do you think the future of jobs look like in Africa?
I think we are likely to see heavy investment in the digital sector, and the African Union has started by developing the Africa Digital Transformation Strategy, which shows the roadmap in the next 10 years. Trying to onboard as many countries and as many sectors as possible into the digital sector, and that cross-cuts the aspect of workforce, the necessary infrastructure, and the right policies in different sectors and in different countries. So, but now, thinking about the future of work and the disconnect that we are having right now, I think we might take a little longer. And I agree with Awar when she said we need to move at our own pace. But even as we move at our own pace, we need to recognize that the rest of the world is not stopping. The rest of the world is still moving. So it would be like a sort of countries trying to look at what they can invest in optimally. And by this, I mean each country needs to investigate itself, look within and see what resources they can produce optimally. Think about a country like Egypt. It's been doing so well on agriculture. If you think about a country like Tanzania, It's been doing well on mining. A country like Botswana and South Africa, they've been doing well on tourism. So it's a matter of now looking at all these major sector drivers in different countries and thinking of how they could add value or remodel those sectors to fit into the needs of the modern day person. A modern day person is looking at flexibility. A modern day person is looking at affordability. A modern day person is looking at convenience. As a person, you want your food delivered from the comfort of your home. But who is going to the farm? The person who is going to the farm needs to spend the least hours possible in the sun. So what technologies can be applied in farming, and what technologies can enable the products to move from the farm to your kitchen or to your dining table? So all those processes are things that will define the future of work. And I want each country to really look within and see what it could do optimally, as opposed to running around and trying to do what everyone else is doing. But from a bigger scale, we need to be at a point where we are quick to embrace technology, because the rest of the world is not waiting for us. Countries are moving ahead. Countries are doing massive investments. Think about South Korea and the artificial intelligence investment. Think about the US and many more countries around the world that are putting really heavy investment in technology, but they are putting it in sectors which they think they are good at. They're not running around and doing what everyone else is doing, and I think that's the beauty I've seen with developed countries. They are keen on to look at their institution, their national capacity, or their national abilities, as opposed to just falling in the blanket sort of policies, which I feel like most of our African countries do. Then the last bit I might want to really talk about is Africa still has a lot of dependence on the development world. I mean, on development funding. If honestly we are going to really move forward, we need to really think beyond development funding, because all this funding comes with conditions. It comes with conditions, comes with strings attached, and sometimes it's short-lived. We need to find our way of local financing. I don't think we are so poor to the level that we can't really, generate our own resources to support the health systems, to support the transport system, to support the education system. It's a whole lot of mindset change, and I know it will take some time. A lot of people may not agree with me, but over time you'll notice that development funding tends to make us a little bit lazy, and we end up thinking that someone else has a solution for us, and we keep on developing that culture, or over decades we think that someone else has solutions for the continent, yet so much could be done with the literal resources that we have. And then I applaud Tanzania. Tanzania is really one country that is showing us the way in terms of using its own local resources and not relying on external loans and this much external help to get things going. And I think if we take the similar directions, so much will happen within the continent. And in a way to appreciate the development funding, whatever is coming, let's also try to remodel and define where it goes.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, Tabang, probably you can touch on a little bit about the future of the future of jobs, and you know, just as we talked, looking at the social injustices, and we've seen that cutting across even, you know, businesses across different sector, and we've also seen that even in southern region, South Africa as well, having that kind of disparity as well. So what could you be able to touch on future of jobs as well?
Yeah, again, I think, you know, just to touch back on the point made earlier in the beginning that, you know, social justice has about 4 pillars, one of which is actually access. And I still maintain that that is probably the biggest challenge we have, is that not everyone, you know, social justice is about equitable access to privilege, to basic livelihoods for people. But in reality, we're not seeing that translate. And that is muchly or mostly based on some historical factors, particularly on the continent, but in South Africa, a lot from our past and where we come from, systems were not necessarily built to cater for everyone. And we've inherited those systems and we're still trying to operate within the systems, but they don't work. So I think on a bigger scale, I think is to just, from a policy perspective, to consider those factors. And I think a situation like COVID-19 and this pandemic has just further highlighted just really how inequitable and how unjust the systems that we've inherited, the structures we've inherited are. So a bigger scale and on a policy scale, which is really not our concern too much, because we're not here for government as a panel. But yeah, I think just to touch on and probably emphasize what Stephen mentioned in terms of job creation going forward, I think sectors that will definitely probably see an increase in, and it may not be jobs in the sense that, you know, the marketplace will be retaining a workforce, but as in people, ordinary citizens, starting businesses, employing, you know, I still believe that SMMEs, small businesses are essentially the backbones of an economy. This countries like Germany were able to be where they are. You know, as you will know, BMW in particular started off as a small family business that then, you know, sort of graduated to the multinational company that it is today. So I think you will see a lot of those sort of coming up, but we need to support those better. And I think in the spaces of technology and digitization, definitely you'll be seeing I think a lot of activity is already happening on the continent, as we've mentioned already. But I think it's about the technologies or developing products and services that will meet the gap. The reality is, it's true. We're not just looking at trying to keep up with the pace of the world. There are some basics that we don't have in place. You think about water and sanitation that have just become a real issue. In Africa, this is a real thing. In fact, the organization I currently work for recently launched a water tank project, something so simple in a local community that just doesn't have access. I mean, I think amongst a couple hundred families, you've got one tap literally per 100 families, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is a situation now where how do you expect people to keep hygiene standards high in a situation like that? So local companies stepping up and saying, this is where we see the solution and this is how we're going to transform it. And then, of course, making it technologically efficient. We mentioned that, I think it was Awar who was saying that, how do you provide internet when people are hungry? In Africa, scarily enough, you probably have more people with a cellular device with access to internet than people with bread or a basic living standard, which is quite interesting that's where we are. So if you have so many Africans with that type of technology in their hands, in even a rural or semi-rural community, really, I think in many ways there are advantages for development and being creative and innovative in that space. I think the healthcare space will probably also see an increase in some serious sort of innovation, creation, development of businesses. It's already happening. I've mentioned the Cape Bio company. Senegal was rolling out a $1 test kit. I think they've taken it to testing, but I'm not sure how far that has come along. So you are seeing those type of basic sort of infrastructural, or let me say technological, developments happening. I also think just in terms of the informal sector, I think I read something last night that said 85.5% of Africa's workforce is in the informal sector, which is quite a high number. And I think what's going to be the challenge or the exciting opportunity going forward is to say, how do you better recognize and support the informal sector, given that they are such a large percentage on the continent? I know that in South Africa, this has been a thing even during lockdown, is to say, so you might give your normal wholesalers permits to serve and to produce essential services, including food. But what about an informal trader who sits on a particular block every single day of the week and actually provides food to a couple hundred people who on their way to work and back? So you can't ignore them forever. And how do you sort of formalize or recognize that sector as well across the board? So yeah, I think it's going to be I want to almost say a juggling act between meeting our basic needs, but also leveraging technological development, leveraging what's going on the global scale to further advance it. I don't see them as being opposites. I think it's things that we can use, and we have to be creative around how do we couple these two things to meet needs, to make us effective first, and being more forefront of negotiating terms and conditions as well, when it comes to whether it's funding coming in, whether it's products coming in, whether it's us producing stuff locally, sending it out. I just time to stand up and say, things will be happening on our terms, and we need to make decisions that reflect such.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Tabang. I think that's quite good. I mean, let's give it a twist a little bit about financing, financing aspect, and you work with microfinances on a daily basis. You work with small and micro businesses mostly on a daily basis. And definitely these are the people actually who slowly grows the economy. Somebody running a small enterprise will soon be a middle enterprise, and then soon going to be a big company. Let's look at the funding aspect, and there's something that you've touched that was really, really important in terms of local funding. How do we raise our own local capital? How can we engage maybe corporate sector to be able to raise money and even support some of these social enterprise? And looking at the future of jobs, how is funding going to play a role, and especially for the small and medium enterprises and social enterprises as well?
Oh, well, yeah. A lot has been discussed today, like very informative. Stephen, thank you for touching on nobody's waiting for Africa. That is true. The world is moving forward and we need to catch up. But then again, one thing that when I think about financing in Africa, I think about data. It's data. If you look at even developing countries, other developing countries, and even if you look at the US, data is very key to them. Remember when they started recently, when the small businesses, were failing, they couldn't keep up because, of COVID-19, people are not buying anymore. Restaurants were shutting up. They came up with a stimulus package, even for the businesses. And what was very key was data. I think data is very key. If you know the number of small businesses you have in a country, even if they're registered with the city council, if you have that data to back it up, you will know that in this economy, we have this number of women dealing with this sector. We have this number of young people within this age bracket dealing with this sector, and these people need our financing. That is the first thing we have to do. We need to ensure that we have data, that people have registered their businesses. I know most people hope not to because of taxing and all that, but that's another thing maybe Moses can touch on. How do we ensure that the tax implications for the small businesses are in a way that they're able to survive? Because even taxes have killed some businesses. Well, taxes, you've seen in Kenya for the past 3 years that maybe, because of tax, people have decided to move their businesses to other countries where they feel like the index of doing business is more affordable and more at ease with them. So that is very important. But going back to the financing of small and medium enterprises or SMEs, now actually they're being called small and growing businesses. Okay. And the reason why they're called small and growing businesses is that most of them are too big for big financing organizations to fund, and they're also quite small for other people to do so. So they're called small and growing businesses. And so we need a funding model whereby we'll be able to sustain these small businesses. Because, for example, look at the Mamamboga in Nairobi. Look at the Mamamboga in Nairobi, who comes in every day, who goes to Marikiti Market, gets their vegetables, comes back and sells them, pays a certain levy for the city council's carries, because that's where they're registered to operate. How do you ensure that they're sustainable for the future? You have to make the environment conducive to them. How do you grow them? By growing them means that the same kind of strategic indicators you put in place for already mid-sized businesses is going to be different for these people. Exactly. You need to look at the tax bracket for this kind of people. How do you move them? How do you create a market for them? Look at all the OCAs. OCAs are some of the small businesses. I don't know if they're small and growing, but they're small businesses. They need a place to operate every single day. But if you leave them on the streets, that is not a place where somebody can grow a business. Number two, what kind of training do these people have access to? Remember, and this is not to say anything bad, but all of us at some point we need some form of training if you're going to start a business. Most businesses are also started out of necessity, and you might not have all the skills. Is there a platform whereby these people can join to learn basic skills, like simple bookkeeping skills, simple, accounting skills, simple, taxation skills, anything that they need access to? And this also brings me to the mentors and the pro bono people. What are you offering? If your business has grown to a certain level, are you reaching down to these people who are starting to grow something and offer your skills and ability? And that also comes in terms of financing, because if you see somebody pitch their businesses, and I've spoken to a few young people who are into business and they're very against pitching because they say, oh, I pitched my business and then now I don't have it, Whoever went to pitch this business to took it and started doing it way better than I can. And now I don't have the resources to catch up. How do we protect such kind of stuff? That you say, if I'm pitching my business to Stephen Mature, we've signed something in advance that Stephen cannot use my ideas to start their own business. And that also, you don't even need that. That also brings us to our values and, the value of honesty, the value of trying to develop other people and creating more and more. So our financing, as Moses said, will come from some of those philanthropy investors. Who knows that if I invest in these small businesses, it will grow. That is the only way we are going to do it, because honestly speaking, I know people have gotten like financing from international venture markets, and at some point they just lose. I don't know whether it's not understanding the nitty-gritties in the papers they sign. I don't want to make that assumption. But at some point, you've had people saying, oh, I lost my business. And you don't understand, how did you lose your business? Or, I had to sell it out because of financing. So we need to go back to the ground and look for our own local financing to support our own people. And that also brings me to something number two. If you're going to start a small business in the future of work, don't be mediocre. Don't be mediocre in the services that you're offering. Nobody likes mediocre. I don't like mediocre. Nobody else like that. You'd rather under-promise and over-deliver than somebody knows that what you're offering can work. I've seen across so many technologies coming up during all these, better ones. I know Steven is one of them. I like what they're creating. And I'm going to use that platform and probably recommend it to other people, like, hey, this is African made, can you please finance this project? But if somebody wants to finance you and your first trial is mediocre, nobody wants to associate with something like that. So you need to ensure that whatever you're bringing to the market is a stellar stuff that people can buy into. And as I wind down, I think the topic I wanted to bring was on the future of jobs and financing is going to be in agriculture. It's going to be in agriculture, and the agriculture I'm talking about is the value addition agriculture. That is the one I'm talking about. If we are growing sweet potatoes, we need to find ways to ensure that we can add value to the sweet potatoes from our farms and empower our people to ensure that everything that we produce, there's a lot of value addition coming in. And through value addition, that means that we are creating those companies and people will want to invest in those companies. And financing is going to come from Africa. Africa is a rich continent. Don't be cheated. We have so many entrepreneurs. So the question is, why are they not investing in us? Maybe that's the question we need to ask them. Why are they not willing to put the money here and grow Africa?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the question I'm going to throw to everybody. Why don't you think that somebody who is rich is not willing to invest in my idea of, making masks or wanting to do value addition to my agricultural products? Because if we invest our money in Africa, we create jobs for young people. And if you create jobs for young people, then we are able to meet the basic needs for everybody in the community. I'll say it over and over again. If you have a generation that have access to good health, good education, good moral values, and any other thing that you consider basic needs, then you're on the right path to achieving what Africa was meant to. But if you skip those three, the basic foundation, we are just running around in circles and always going back to our plan that was meant when our forefathers got independence. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think before we come to our last question, as we close up this discussion, and I think it's been really, really amazing discussion. Moses, could you be able to touch something on taxes in trade, even across the continent? Because I think Award mentioned something like that on her conversation.
Okay, thanks, Calvin and everybody for how far we've come now. I'm not so much familiar with the taxation side of things, but I believe that, of course, a lot can be done in reducing the taxes there, especially for upcoming entrepreneurs. I think, for instance, through integration and through when countries get into free trade areas, for example. And the example that I can use is, for instance, the East African community, where you find when you have a customs area, for instance, it means trading within the region actually happens tax-free. So if you are importing, if a good has been fully manufactured in Kenya, and of course they have what they call the rules of origin, where they can determine that over 75% of the labor, of the material, the good was made in Kenya, for instance, and Kenya and Tanzania are part of the same free trade area, the East African community. So you can easily export that to Tanzania without incurring any additional taxes.
Thank you very much. I think that was that was quite elaborative and quite a good discussion. I mean, just as we wind up, Sorry, just go ahead.
Okay, so that's as far as trade between one country and another is concerned. And so that's, as far as the export-import taxes are concerned. But then, of course, is the question of within our own countries, how do we come up maybe with better or efficient tax systems, like friendly tax systems, like for our entrepreneurs? But I think there's progress being done on that front, even within countries. But of course, the challenge now that is coming up in Kenya, for instance, is where now we want to levy like digital taxes, for instance. It might not. That kind of action might be well intended in some way, because it targets, for instance, digital platforms like Uber, for instance, where they might not be paying any other tax in Kenya except for the VAT and maybe the tax that comes out of the business. But on the other hand, and I think Stephen might be able to expand more on how it affects the emerging tech businesses in a country, for instance. Do we go ahead and allow our businesses to compete with those externals, and then we end up not imposing any digital tax? Or then how efficiently do we manage it to ensure that the cross-border digital platforms are able to pay taxes in the countries that they operate in, while as well still ensuring that our businesses, that our homegrown businesses, for instance, I think let's say for example, M-Pesa pays tax, of course, through Safaricom and through the transactions, yes. But then there are other, it's a complex system on how to tax a business, how to tax a digital platform, for instance. Because if I run an e-commerce platform and I'm based in South Africa, right? It means I can move around. I can decide today. I can decide this year I'm in South Africa. The other year I'm in another country. But maybe my main core business is registered in South Africa. But then, how do I pay the VAT tax, for example? So when someone buys, they'll pay a VAT, but we don't know like where, for instance, whether they are paying to the other side where the buyer is buying the thing, or they are paying in this side, right? And that's where I think in places like the United States, if you are buying, because I've bought many things on Amazon and even before Amazon on eBay, and in places like California, they used to tell you, in eBay will tell you that 4% of this transaction has to go to the California government, California state government, you see. So on the one hand, we might see that taxes like digital tax might have its bad effects in terms of affecting upcoming businesses. But on the other hand, is of course ensuring that we generate enough tax. But I guess the question was maybe more tagged on how then do we make the environment supportive to our homegrown businesses. And I think those are questions that people who are more efficient with taxes can help us understand. But if I speak it broadly from, let's say, from the perspective of the CFTA, for example, building up on the example of the East African community that I gave, where if we're in a free trade area, then I can easily export to Tanzania without any other more taxes. Then the CFTA, as it is, its vision is to actually take us towards that kind of process where I can export to South Africa duty-free without paying any other taxes, as long as it's determined that this product was made in a member state of the CFTA. But of course, that's a long process, and that's somewhere it will take us even several years before we can get the CFTA running and for this kind of benefits to be realized. Yeah, that's as much as I can say as far as the tax issues are concerned.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're just going to get a parting shot from all of you as we close up this discussion in terms of how definitely the future looks like for young people. What are some of the inspiration that you think would be good for them? And what would be the way forward, and what are some of your wishes, as well as obviously you're all young Africans and you want to see Africa develop? What are some of your wishes as well? And I think we'll start with Thabang.
You're not saying hi to my friends for 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I think for me, I think I'm an optimist and maybe a bit of an idealist in the sense, and I'm hopeful. Of course, for the longest time on the continent, really, I think we've been sort of the I want to call it the black sheep in that, across the world, because we carry so much of the historical burden of injustice, in structural inequality, infrastructural inequalities, etc. But I really feel like these are platforms or stepping stones for us to reach certain heights. I think I'm very positive that we have the potential and the capacity to really be world-class, whether it be from a technological perspective, creating of industry, realizing, producing our own products, be it in the I just think about, even the production of fabric, which is a real thing on the continent, and how many African countries have really just gone on and spearheaded and produced their own in that respect. So I really think this is a time of within and seeing where we can be innovative to produce and fill the gaps that are really our own to meet, as was said already in the conversation, that of course we're juggling basic needs and basic necessities of Africans, but also I I think we are completely able and capable to compete with the global. I think it's already happening. I think just for the maybe younger people who are either in the entrepreneurial space or those who are already in the marketplace, I think this is a time to grit our teeth and keep pushing forward. I think our ability to be resilient in the face of adversity is something that's actually a treasure. And I really think we need to be each other's keepers in that sense. I think we need to promote one another. I think we need to promote the initiatives being taken by fellow young Africans, whether it be here at home or in the diaspora. The attitude that Stephen was referring to, that sometimes it's like we don't really value or believe that our own is sufficient, is above par. That needs to change. For me, I'm inspired by just even entrepreneurs, just in the South African context, people I know in my networks who've gone on and said, listen, this is a time for me to start my business. I've been wanting to do so, but also let us not be naive. You know, we need people to also step up and mentor. We need those who've gone before to also play their part to say, okay, so of course, we need to carry the baton over. What are some of our learnings? And also don't limit the next generation based on your experiences. And for us to say we're comfortable to have to learn and fail sometimes in our own path. So yeah, I'm overall hopeful. I think this is just an opportunity that is masked in work. It looks like work, but it's an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen.
I think for me, it's like Africa has a huge opportunity to cash into what it has been building over years, and the advantage that it has right now is within its young population that is able to come up with creative and innovative products and services. And I would call on African governments and the development sector and our local philanthropists to look at how they could remodel their funding models and their technical support to directly look at young people or young population, and at the same time try to look at the space of women within this whole vision of the next sort of steps after this pandemic. So if we're able to, create a firm investment around young people and women, I don't see why some of us would be leaving the continent for any reason. I think we'll have a continent that is super self-sufficient, ranging from education sector to manufacturing. And I know some of these things are very theoretical as we talk, but young people and young women are actually showing the way. So let's direct the support towards that kind of that population, and Africa will actually cash into the benefits in a few years. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Caroline?
Well, I think this has been very informative. I think my take would be to say that we need to recognize that Africa is not a one-shoe-fits-all. We are not the same. We have different demographics, and we are doing things differently depending on each and every country's strategic plan. So I think each country needs to go back to its own strategic plan and see if they're achieving their agendas, especially for the young people, because I think entrepreneurship for me is going to come out of creativity and innovation to solve the kind of challenges that Kenya is facing, that Africa is facing. That is how you start businesses. It has to solve something. If somebody's going to buy a product, you're buying something that you don't have. If you're going to seek something else, you seek something that you don't have. And that's how we are going to nurture our young people, our women, to start this business to solve. But for us to do that, I've said this and I'll say it again. For me, it is the basic needs. We need to put our education in order. If our education system is not working, we need to put it in order. I attended a session whereby I was speaking to a young girl who is like 16 years old, and she's joining, I think, aerospace engineering. And she's known it from the day she stepped into that school. These are people who've been nurtured by their own teachers. Like, teachers recognize talent in their own students, and then they work with them through, and they recommend them, you know. And they know that I have this number of students in my class who are going to be great engineers. Can we support them in identifying good engineering schools? We need to sit down and identify our own talent. I cannot be an engineer. Some of you cannot be engineers, but you can be great entrepreneurs. You are a great lawyer, right? From just what you've been speaking about, a great attorney from what you've been speaking about. And to mature, you're a good policy analyst. And I think where everything fails for me, if I look at Kenya, it is the implementation stage. I think we have everything figured out. But where we slow down, it's when it reaches a point whereby we now need to implement these things. Kenya has an amazing strategic country plan that I think was lasting 30 years. I stand corrected. But how often do you go back to that strategic plan and say, look, this is what we have achieved. We need to think, stop, think back, and pick one ABCD that technology is going to support. If we do that as a country, if we do that as Africa, if Kenya comes to the table with South Africa and says, look, this is what I'm working on, this is what you're working on, this is what you've done best. Can I borrow some of those and apply in this demographic? They're different, but it can work. Because we are talking from an African perspective. But if you're going to borrow something from Europe and come and force it on your own people, it might work for a certain period of time. But given your foundations and your demographics, you're setting yourself up for failure. You've seen it in the past where our leaders go to learn a few things in different countries. Look at Israel, for example. Amazing agricultural products with people who didn't even, Israel was like, is it Israel? Like, was a desert, if I'm not wrong. And they now have, look at Dubai, look at all those things. Different demographics, but it's working for them. Why are we not going to South Africa? Why are we not going to Uganda? Why are we not going to Tanzania and borrow a few things that are working for them? There's no shame in borrowing. There's no shame in looking what is working for somebody else and making it better. I think that's why we need to focus on, we are going to make this continent better so that everybody else who wants to come in will find us with a strong bargaining power. That way we win. We do not need your aid, but we need your direct investment. We don't need your aid. We need direct investment. If you're not investing in Africa, you can take your aid back with you. Now you have a strong bargaining power. I think that's the future of Africa for me.
Wow. Thank you very much. And I think I love that aspect that you touch on. And also, I think we didn't talk about SDG, and I think we probably will talk about that. And I think one of the key things that SDG, the reason why we have SDGs is it also acts as a way of guidance. Every country should at least be good at one particular SDG. If it's health, as part of the health and well-being, if it's maybe, poverty, if it's climate, or if it's, gender and all those kind of, and I think that was a very good kind of guideline as well that we didn't mention. But I think just to mention a little bit, I think that's something that we can probably talk about next time. Moses, kindly give us your closing remarks as we close up. Moses, are you still there? Moses, are you still there?
He's gone.
No, yeah. Okay, guys. So I think.
Oh, he's there. He's back.
Moses, are you back? No, that was Steven. Moses is not back. I think
you had my voice.
Oh, but sure.
That was me.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, guys. Thank you so
He's
much.
back. He's back.
Oh, okay, Moses, please give us your closing remarks. We were almost closing without you giving us your remarks.
Sure. I'll just say this has been really good. It's been really eye-opening and enlightening, and I think I love the discussion. What I can say is that I remain optimistic, and I think that sometimes we might not be seeing the small little efforts happening, but I think there's a lot happening on the ground. We just need to crystallize them and make more action possible. And I agree with, for example, Awar mentioned that, there's no more new policies Africa needs. We already have them, but they're just sitting on shelves in government offices or in some databases. We just need the political will to act. And I think that if we have learned something from the current crisis, is that we need to get our things in order. Let's support our young people. Let's support our entrepreneurs. Let's support our businesses. Let's build our markets. Let's implement our policies. Let's really know that we are on our own. We are on our own. If we want to get out of the dependency and all that, we're on our own. And I think continuing the pace with what we are doing now, taking this forward, I'm optimistic that in the next 20 years, 50 years, those visions, a lot is going to change in terms of how the continent looks. And I think the good thing is always that we are having this discussion. What we need now more is to focus now on the actions and get things working. That's what I can say as a closing remark. So thank you so much, guys, and Calvin for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, Taban. It was nice having you here. Thanks for taking your time. I know you guys are busy with work, busy at writing, working and all that. So thank you very much, Stephen. Really appreciate for you coming along as well. Thank you, War, for also coming. I really appreciate, and thank you, Moses, as well. I think this has been a good conversation. And since it's on YouTube, I'm sure people will watch it. I'll share with you guys a link. You can share it along, and I think it's been a good conversation.
Thank you, Calvin. Thank you.